I'm Dr. Steph Sloan. I'm the Executive Director and Chief Scientific Officer of Child's Voice Project. And today we're going to talk a little bit about engaging children in the courts. This conversation is specific to the courts, but a lot of these principles apply in other kinds of child-facing professions as well. So we will go ahead and get moving. Just a recording disclaimer, we are recording. Please make sure that we don't share any confidential information. We try not to mention anything that's case specific, so just to keep confidentiality for everyone, because we do post these on our YouTube channel. I'm going to turn it over to Atia. Atia is our Chief Legal Officer. She's going to talk a little bit about our core beliefs about engaging children, and then talk a little bit about the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child. That's kind of a foundational perspective that we take at Child's Voice Project.
All right, thank you. Atia Mosley, Chief Legal Officer, and welcome everyone. Glad you're joining us today. So we have these beliefs to set the stage for the work that we're doing, and it is essentially part of our mission to ensure that children have a voice. And it's important to our work, and also it's important to each of us personally. So let's look at the first core belief. Children are natural truth tellers and the best orators of their own lives. As an attorney, I have spent many years bringing witnesses to court, and witnesses are best when they have actually witnessed the very thing that they're going to be testifying to. And one of the things that we find important is to support the fact that children can share about their own experiences better than anyone else, because they're actually living them. They're the ones who are living in the homes. They're the ones who are experiencing interactions with the adults in their lives. And they are the best individuals to share about their experiences. Additionally, one of the concerns people will often throw out when it comes to children is around the issue of credibility. And children are natural truth tellers. And years ago, there was a show that talked about like funniest kids or something like that. And kids say the darndest things. They tend to be pretty straightforward and direct, many of them, in my experience. And I also like to put out there that when people start thinking about children and their credibility, the same things can apply to adults. And so we don't want to have a bias against children. And this first core belief helps us with that. Children's wishes being more practical than adults realize, I think, is pretty core to our experiences interacting with children. And I think it's also a really common misperception that children are going to ask for something that is frivolous. It's so common that Dr. Steph and I use the same example when we talk about this, which is that if children are asked what their wishes are, that they're going to then ask for ice cream for dinner. And that's not the case. Having represented children directly for 8 or 9 years, my experience is that most of the time my clients were asking for things that were really appropriate and reasonable. Like one client didn't want to go to visitation during the week because he wasn't able to do his homework, and it affected his ability to go to sleep on time so that he could wake up and get to school on time. So a lot of very rational and reasonable decisions come out of children, and we want to make sure that we're recognizing that and respecting that. When it comes to decision making, the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which I'll talk about momentarily, is really one of the first times that it's recognized that it's important for children to be part of the decisions that impact their lives. And that's something that we uphold, because we know that children who are listened to in a decision making process tend to follow the decision, even if it's not exactly what they wanted. And there's so much benefit for them when they are included in the decision-making process. And there's also benefit to the adults. It's benefit to the court system, benefits to the families, and then benefits to society. And so we stand behind that core belief as well. And we spoke last month about protective factors. And if you happen to miss that roundtable or want to hear it again, um, we we encourage you to go back and do that. So I don't have to spend too much time here. And then finally, all of our scholarship is rooted in this idea that when we prioritize children's wishes and not just what we think is best for them, then there's benefits to all of us. As I referenced already, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, this was adopted in, I believe it was 1989. And it really was the first time that there was this awareness of the importance of children expressing themselves. I was doing some research on this last night for one of the papers that we're working on. And there were declarations that had come out before this one, but they really were from a viewpoint of protecting children. And certainly, protecting children is an important part um, of adults' interactions with them. But this convention really identified children as their own individuals who have their own ideas and encouraged us to put those ideas into practice when we are making decisions about children, giving them a voice in those decisions. And one of the other pieces that I'll share about this, and if you'll go ahead to the next slide, the United States was part of the decision to have this convention adopted, this human rights treaty. Unfortunately, though, we have not ratified it here in the United States, and it is not legally binding on us, but it is still really important part of the the I'll say the philosophy of children's rights, which is recognizing the importance of honoring this convention, even though it's not legally binding. And so we appreciate that. The United States hasn't, or I won't say we appreciate it. The United States hasn't ratified it, and yet we can still hold ourselves to the standards that are articulated in the convention. So let me turn it back over to you, Dr. Stuff, and thank you.
Great, thanks, Atia. So Atia went over the UN Rights of the Child, which really is sort of a foundational document that we revere at the Child's Voice Project. We really just believe, similar to what Article 12 says, respect for children's views, that children have a right to give their opinions. They have a right to play a role in things that affect them. And adults should take them seriously and facilitate meaningful engagement with them. How do we do that? How do we meaningfully engage with children? I say meaningfully because we engage with children a lot in a way that might feel meaningful to adults, but isn't necessarily translating to meaningful for children. I've spent my entire career working with children, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what are the things adults can do to help engagement translate to feeling meaningful and valuable for both the adult and the child. There are some prerequisites. So one of those things, it's called a curiosity mindset. What does that even mean? It means that anytime you're interacting with a child, I would say this is best practice for interactions all the time, really, but with children, it is especially important that you just get curious. We as adults tend to have overactive judgment systems. And so our brains will just discount information or communication, nonverbal, verbal cues that we experience because we're using judgment and discernment inside of our brains in an automatic way. And that really gets in the way of being able to meaningfully partner with children. So when I say curiosity mindset, what I'm really asking of people is slow down your thinking and your judgment system, and as you find yourself making quick judgments about things, you instead slow down and say, huh, that's interesting. I wonder why. Or if a child says something to you, rather than taking it at face value, dig a little deeper, get curious about that. And, you know, typically curiosity mindset serves us very well when children are having a hard time, when their behavior or their actions maybe are not easy to deal with for adults. And so, being able to stay curious about it and ask questions and take an interest in the why behind big feelings or certain statements, that really helps us not just like prevent the automatic discounting or judgment of what children have to say. It helps us stay open to receiving information and being able to just think through and think with that information rather than just swiping it off our table. Don't take yourself too seriously. I think this is adults. We have to be so serious all the time, and that is such a bummer for kids. Like kids can be serious. They often have to be serious, and that is not the way that they engage. So, like relationship building with kids is really built through play. And that is true through every age and stage, even teenagers. If I want my 13-year-old son to talk about his feelings and his day or some hard things, the easiest way to do that is by just going outside and playing basketball with him and, joking around and, being silly in those contexts. It takes kind of that veil down. It helps like just show your vulnerability a little bit. And it's just really important. So like whenever I say, we engage through play, we also have to engage through like in organic and like intentional play. So like that means you have to have fun. You can't just cosplay as a human having fun. So you have to maybe do a little bit of investigation. How do I look when I'm having fun? That's the kind of nonverbal cues that a child wants to see when I'm being silly. They want to see that it's like natural. And also, if you've spent any time with kids and the whole like children are natural truth tellers, the kids can say some things that's like, oh, ouch. Um, but what is also nice about that is like it's them showing you what they think and who they are. And if you can just not take yourself too seriously and be willing to just like get a little cringe, then it just comes off like so much more vulnerable, natural, and open. Um, Using child-friendly spaces. So a lot of us are professionals. We operate in, office buildings and places that are kind of boring. And it's not possible for all of us to create the most child-friendly space. But it is possible for us to even just have child-friendly things for kids to play with, having a whole area where kids can pick things up, take a look at them. Fidget toys are always fun. I don't know if any of you are in any way familiar with the Neato craze that's happening right now. Neatos are like these squishy things that they're like stress balls and things, and it's a specific brand, and they're sold out everywhere. Like kids are hungry for Neatos, and they have been around for a while. I don't know what happened on TikTok to make kids be like, oh my God, I need a Neato, but they are literally shelves cleared out. If you could find a Neato and have it in your office, that would make you look really cool right now. But just being able to have things that kids can like have tactile, have things to color with, have things to draw with, have things that look like stuff that's fun, like things with color and fun. I don't know. I love one of my very favorite child friendly things that is actually super annoying. is one of those like little portable basketball hoops. And you just like toss it over the door. First of all, it's loud and the ball is bouncing around and it's very hectic, but boy, is it effective at turning any space into a child-friendly space. Um, Another thing that we need to do as adults, big prerequisite, be aware of your own discomfort. Often it's us that's the problem, not kids. So we tend to have this idea that like we first of all, it doesn't always feel natural to hang out with kids, to talk with kids. Sometimes our jobs require us to have very serious, very uncomfortable conversations with kids. Sometimes we're required to be in the presence of really uncomfortable feelings and circumstances. And it is okay to have like, oh, uncomfortableness with that. It's okay. And I want to just kind of reiterate that, like, one of the major prerequisites is being okay with not feeling like it's always totally natural. It's not. It's a perfectly typical feeling to feel like awkward and wondering if you're saying the right thing. That's human interaction. We tend to do that with everybody everywhere, not with just kids. But we have an opportunity to model how to deal with that. Sometimes you're with kids that do not want to talk to you and they do not necessarily like you. And that's hard. It's difficult. But you also, again, you can see it as an opportunity to model how to gently experience those kinds of things. And if you can show a child that it is safe to dislike you, that is really communicating something quite huge. So sometimes when you're sitting there and you're like, oh, I feel really awkward, I feel like, oh, just think about like, okay, what am I feeling? Why do I feel like I need to resolve it? Do I feel like I need to change how the child is responding to me so that I can resolve my own discomfort? Just naming and identifying, like, oh, I feel really awkward right now. I don't know if I'm doing the right thing. You could say that inside of your head. Sometimes it's helpful to say things outside and just verbalize those uncomfortable feelings too. And then finally, another prerequisite, let the child lead. Just meet them where they are. All right, so let's get into relationship building. If we've met the prerequisites, we have the right orientation, we're like practicing being silly, we're doing all of those things. Now it's time to really focus on like one of the most key ingredients of engaging children is the relationship building part. It's a lot of time for kids to get comfortable with adults a lot of times. Like some kids, automatically comfortable with adults, automatically comfortable with everybody. Many kids, that is not the case. Some kids, you can tell, feel very guarded, even though they're being very polite. It just takes time to kind of like melt those conditions away and develop that relationship. So, giving yourself time and flexibility to build that relationship is super important. We don't always have the time. Sometimes it's not possible. But with our pilot project attorneys, they are really so amazing at prioritizing that relationship building piece when they can and building it in throughout their cases. And so, if you don't know what I'm talking about, our pilot attorneys go back and take a look at one of our past roundtables where we invited them and they came and they spoke with us about the pilot project that we have with client directed representation in Maryland. So, for your viewing pleasure, it is available on our YouTube. But when you can, spend at least 2 to 3 times. I say times, and what does that mean? 2 to 3 times. Times for me is like 30-ish minutes, 20 to 30 minutes or longer with the child. So I spend at least 20 to 30 minutes. Maybe I spend an hour. I do that 2 to 3 times before I launch into anything substantial. Like I'm not going to expect, unless we're in a like real time crunch and I absolutely have to, I'm not going to expect a child to sit there and disclose the hardest things that ever happened to them when they've never even met me before. It takes time for them to acclimate to you, to the environment, build trust. And so 2 to 3 times with that child before I get down to any nitty gritty Nitty gritty is a scientific word that means just like anything substantial to do with your job. I was also an educator for a very long time. You don't always get the luxury of having that time. But what I would do when I didn't have time to like fully prioritize the like regimented amount of relationship building that I wanted to, I would instead just try like every 10 minutes of every hour, I would just stop what I was doing and connect and just find a way to connect, attune. I We'd have this thing we'd call stop, drop, and roll, where we would actually just like turn on music and be silly for 10 minutes of every hour. And it's just, there are lots of different ways that you can build it in, even when you do not have the luxury of time for whatever your profession might be. So ways to build relationship, I've talked about play, creativity, exploration. I love hands-on things, doing like crafts, moon sand. I love sensory, like containers and things. I have learned as a professional to work very hard on my own sensory issues because I used to be a person that could never mix the Play-Doh colors. I would cringe inside just watching like rice flinging around my room. Oh my gosh, I would die inside. I worked on that. I had to get over it because I learned that when we could have some tactile exploration, the relationship building went so much smoother. Entering into their world and learning about their interests and hobbies and what excites them. But then there's a different part to that. You then have to remember their interests and bring it up again. You might want to go and learn something about that and come back and share it with them the next time. Be like, hey, you were telling me about anime, and I went and I like looked it up and I was like looking, and it's like this really cool thing and I found it. Tell me about this. So that they see that not only are you like listening to their interests, but you're actually engaging in a reciprocal way with their interests. Ask them to bring things that are stuff they like. If they have a Pokemon binder, ask them to bring their tablet, show you their Roblox world. There's so many different ways to ask them to bring in pieces of their world so that you can experience it and they can see that you genuinely care. You're not just asking, like checking boxes, like, what are your hobbies? What do you like to do for fun? They can tell when that feels disingenuous and formulaic. So, finding ways to just continue to weave it back in is really helpful. And then share information about yourself and finding common interests. I like to do different games where it's like you're trying to guess somebody else's favorite color, and like they're trying to guess it for you, and you're trying to guess it for them. And then you're able to like exchange your guesses. There are so many different ways to share information about yourself. I also, hot take, I share information about myself when like maybe some professionals in the social work or psychology field would say, don't share anything about yourself. You need professional boundaries. I actually think that you can have professional boundaries and share information about who you are as a person. And it just makes kids feel so much more um, just like comfortable with you, like you're a person. And so I let kids ask me all kinds of questions. When I was a teacher, you know, the kids are asking you all kinds of questions. And sometimes I would say, I don't want to answer that one, find another one to ask me. But being willing to ask questions or answer questions about yourself really shows like vulnerability, willingness to build trust, and that you are a person and they are a person. And that opens the door to building an actual relationship. Okay, so now we've spent all of this time, we've got our prerequisites, we built relationship, we've done all that. Here are some things that can help with communication with children. Um, so this is oversimplified. I could actually teach a 12-week course on this kind of topic here, but I also just want to highlight it because it is important. So when Atia mentioned at the top of our session that children are natural truth tellers, I when we say that, there are always people that are like, have you ever seen children? They absolutely are not always truth tellers. No, they're not always telling the truth, but they are always authentic in a way that we don't give them credit for. So I have children, I have four of them. I have seen my fair share of dishonesty. And when a child is confronting me with something that I don't feel like is the full picture or isn't fully honest, I have a really specific way of handling it. It's actually the number two thing on, or number one thing, I think it was on my list of prerequisites, which is get curious, ask questions. Say, okay, so you're telling me that, and I get that. I hear you. I also have this other information too, and those things don't match up. Can you help me understand? Really getting curious about why a child isn't being honest in that moment. Or sometimes I think a child isn't being honest. Like that's my just like judgment reaction. And I actually have to self correct because I was wrong about what I thought was happening. And so, again, curiosity is like the antidote for that. But then also, a lot of times when kids are not being honest, there's a reason why. They might feel afraid to tell the truth. They might feel like overly scrutinized and like they're going to get in trouble. And so, all of these things, like we have to understand the context. So, if a child is telling me something, my job is not to disprove or prove whether or not they are being honest. My job is to add context and understand what they're telling me in context. How do I do that? I ask questions. And when I'm asking questions, children respond way better to open ended questions. They respond better to more simple, clear questions. I like to ask kids what's important for me to know. I like to ask kids what questions I should ask because oftentimes they have way better ideas of the important things. I might be hyper focused on one specific thing because that's what adult minds do. Our brains get really focused on one really specific thing, and kids' brains are a little bit more open than that. We like to talk about like kids' brains being underdeveloped. It's not exactly how I like to see it. I like to see it as they're developed in a moment in their lives, and the way that that brain is situated is uniquely positioned to help us see the world in a really neat way. So, depending on how old they are, I'm going to ask a kid to tell me what I should be curious about. What should I be interested in? Here's what I think is important. Am I getting that right? A lot of times I'm just like, oh, wow, that's super interesting. Say more about that. Um, that is like the best way to just learn about a kid is give them just the stage and let them tell you all about the things that they know a ton about and the things that they're excited about. When you are communicating, it is always really helpful to check for understanding. When I was teaching, I taught for many years a class to undergraduate college students about intimate relationships, which it was a very fun time making like young adults and older teenagers feel really cringe. That was a very fun time. But one of the things that I used to teach in that class that they actually found really helpful, and I got feedback like, wow, Dr. Sloan, I keep using that thing that you taught, is how we check for understanding. There's a formula we can use. When our brains are focused on stuff, or when we're feeling stressed about things, which, like, I think the adult state is perpetual stress, I'm just going to guess. We have to do things to get our brains kind of like back on the record, like putting the needle back on the record, getting back into a smooth state. So, here is a formula. I like to use formulas because they override any kind of hypervigilance or any kind of stress or any kind of overthinking. It allows your brain to have something to default to. So when I'm checking for understanding, first, I am paraphrasing back to that kid what they said to me, but I'm doing it in a very specific way. First, I'm using some of their words back to them, but then I'm also adding some of my own words. And I do that in a very specific way because using their words back to them tells that child, hey, I heard these words from you, and these words sounded really important. And I just want to make sure that I'm using and understanding the important words. But then when you add some of your own words, it shows that you have an invested interest in meaning and conjoined together making meaning. And so then you use some of your words back, and that serves two purposes. It helps them see that you were listening and trying to make a connection, but it also models for them different ways of describing their circumstances, their interests, it gives them modeled language. So that's my formula. I paraphrase back to them what they said to me. I use some of their words and some of my words. I do that strategically, and it gets easier with practice. And then I say, did I get that right? Is there anything I missed? Do you feel like how I said that captured what you were thinking? Or should I have said that in a different way? And then they'll tell us. They will just tell us, yep, like actually, you said this, but I meant this. And they'll clarify, and you'll say, okay, that was helpful. Thank you. Um, I like to ask rather than assume. I am a big fan of what happens when you assume, uh, but I'm not going to go into that because this is a family friendly lecture. But I do like to never assume. I just say, how did you feel or think about that? Sometimes we as adults are like, oh, that must have been really traumatic or upsetting. And kids are like, actually, it was fine. It wasn't a big deal. I'll give you just an example from my own life because I am sharing parts of myself as part of relationship building, modeling that with you. My 15-year-old daughter and freshman in high school had this whole like friendship thing happen as 15-year-olds do. And I like immediately was like, oh no, this is bad. This is not gonna, she's gonna be really upset about this. And I assumed, I did the thing I'm telling you not to do. I made an assumption. I said, oh man, that must have been really upsetting. And she's like, no, actually, I'm fine with it. I'm okay with this happening because if this happens, then it gives us an opportunity to address some of these things that have been causing problems anyway. And that, like, again, was just like our kids, these kids in our world are really good at teaching us our own lessons. But it was just a helpful reminder. Like, I thought I was asking a good question. I was making an assumption with my question. And so once she corrected me on that, I was like, that is so interesting. So tell me what happened. And I asked a better question. I also like to ask things like, what else do you want me for me to understand? What do you think I'm getting wrong? What are you most worried about me understanding about this? And really just like asking those good questions that also check for understanding. And then finally, validation, affirming their feelings and perspectives. So that can be just as simple as, again, repeating those words back to them that they gave you. Sometimes it can be as simple as, like, yeah, wow, that's intense. Like sometimes there aren't great words to say because yeah, that sounds really stressful. I don't want to make the assumption that it's stressful. So wow, that's intense. That was a very surprising moment. Like just saying back to them, like capturing the wow and mirroring back that like we don't actually have to make decisions about how we feel about these things. We can do that through validation. We can also say, if something is really upsetting to someone, like that is really upsetting for you. And I like to use their words back to me, I like to use their words back to them while I'm validating too. So, like, especially if it's something I can't change. My kid says, I don't want to go to track practice every day. My shins hurt. I say, yeah, wow, that is hard. It's hard going to track practice and running every day. And I bet your shins really hurt. Can I get you something for that? We've got some ice packs. We've got, some sports tape. What can I do to help you? And then when he says, well, can I just skip practice? No, we're not missing practice, but I hear you. It is really hard. We can validate kids. And what I love about validation is that 9 times out of 10, it will help the problem just go away. My kid will be way less likely to argue with me if I can spend the bulk of that conversation focusing on what is hard and validating that kid. Okay, so I want to take a moment to put some of this in context because this, like the majority of you, are doing this in a court context. So I wanted to talk to Atia a little bit and just like, I'm going to do a little mini interview of Atia because I want to take some of these ideas that I use when working with children and see how it functions in the court world. So, Atia, I'm just going to go back here to our prerequisites. Um, can you tell me a little bit about like how you handled your own discomfort? Can you like give us an example of a time that like a kid was saying something to you that made you really upset, uncomfortable, stressed? How did you like, can you walk us through like that general circumstance and like
Mhm.
how did you manage that in your mind? Did you do it in the moment? Did you do it later? How did you as an attorney handle that? Because you've worked with a lot of kids in a lot of really difficult cases and you've heard lots of very difficult things. How did you handle your own discomfort in those moments?
So I think the situations that potentially cause the most discomfort was not based on what a child actually said, but when a child didn't say something. So children who were silent, who didn't answer my questions or didn't answer my questions fully, or would not meet with me because they did not want to participate. And so those are the situations that I found to be more challenging. And what I did, the main thing that worked was to meet my clients where they were. So I did not go into my client interviews with expectations of getting information from them. And that was something that I told my staff. We need to build our cases as if our child clients are not the main source of the information. Yes, they're natural truth tellers. Yeah, they're the best witnesses for their own lives, but we still then did our best to try to build a case so that the child did not feel like the pressure was on them. And so that was one of the things that I did when a client did not want to talk to me, didn't want to answer a question, was over it. That's very common. My clients were over it. They were tired of dealing with it. The length of the cases went way beyond anything that they could manage. And so that's what I did. I would meet them where they were. And that seemed to, over the course of the case, I would get what I needed, but in a particular moment, I would be able to give my clients the ability to say, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this right now, or I don't want to do this anymore.
I really love that because the silence really is so difficult.
Mhm.
Silence from older teenagers too, it like cuts different. And and so we have to be able to like put it into context. What I love about what you just said, Atia, is you like modeled how like you have to really think differently about your own responses
Mhm.
to a child's silence or strong emotions or whatnot. I also really like what you just said because it addresses one of the most key concerns that I constantly hear from people when we're talking about engaging the voice of a child is we're going to put kids in the middle. And what you just mentioned was such an important strategy for how we avoid doing that. We rely on a lot of other sources of information, and you communicate through that approach that it's not all on them to give you information. Yeah, I appreciate that response. And like, how did you, how did you get past the discomfort of being on the other end of a child's silence?
So really, I got to a point where, and I think this has come up with our pilot project attorneys, where I was not taking it personal. And that is, I think, important, as you pointed out, for all relationships, but especially when it came to our child clients, making it okay, like not having my own expectations as to what I was supposed to get from them. So making it okay, it didn't reflect poorly on me as a professional, and being able to put that into context. I also, I spent a lot of my career representing victims of domestic violence, adults and children. And there's this need for autonomy that I carried over into representing children directly when it comes to information sharing. And I think that that is something else, like recognizing that if I really want to empower the child client, then I need to respect their autonomy when they say no. And that can be difficult. Our grand twins just turned 4, and they really embraced the word no the last 6 months or so. So no is a complete sentence. So
Yeah, I love that. And I always say too that like respecting their no in times where you are able to. Because like
mhm,
honestly, we know that there are some no's that we have to be like, well, sorry, you still have to wear a coat today. I like, but sometimes we can't respect every no. But what we can do is select the ones that we can honor, and
mhm,
the more no's that you can honor, the more yeses you'll get from them.
mhm.
And it's like a
Good
really
point.
quick yielding solution. There are times too, just back to like our communication basics, when I'm getting a no, I'm getting curious. I'm
Mhm.
wondering why. Okay, you don't want to do that. Can you help me understand why? Sometimes I know why. And if I know why, I'm not going to ask them why because I'm not going to ask them to explain themselves when they really don't need to. But it really does help me. I used to have a student that refused to use a pencil, and it made things really, really hard because there was so much scribbling on the paper and a
Mhm.
lot of like rattling up the paper and starting over. And I I would feel so frustrated. Like we have pencils in this classroom. I provide all of the writing utensils. Why? Why won't you use a pencil? And I asked the kid, like, can you help me understand why you don't want to use a pencil? And he's like, it's a sensory issue. I can't stand the sound of
Mm.
it scratching on my paper. And I'm
Yeah.
like, I I understand that. I don't have that same problem, but I do
Mhm.
understand. And being
Mhm.
able to get curious and ask
Mhm.
good questions about their no can be really powerful.
Mhm.
I
Yes,
want
definitely.
to just ask one more question of you,
Mhm.
Atia. I want to talk about like in your time with kids, what were some of your favorite ways to build relationship with them?
So thank you. I was thinking about this before when you were listing different strategies and such, and one that I um, don't know that you mentioned is food. And I would always use food to break the ice. We would walk our clients down to the ice cream shop, and they could pick out whatever flavor they wanted, and that was incredibly successful to get them to open up until I met a family and offered to go and to take them to get ice cream. And the I think he was 14-year-old at the time. It was like, no, we don't want to go for ice cream. And another part of that for me is creativity. When I am encountering a child's no, then it gives me an opportunity to be more creative in order to get in order to further that relationship building, in order to build that trust. And so those are two sort of like key components for me, was food. And it didn't have to be ice cream. It really could be anything that we had that and one of the things we would do is we would ask parents, we would have a survey. And so if you, I'm sorry, an or like a form, intake form. So if you feel concerned about, giving a child who has an allergy something improperly, you can try to get that information from an adult beforehand. So yeah, food and creativity are two big key components.
Yeah, food was always a big one to me. And did you know, fun fact, when you are stressed, like this is true for adults, but it is especially true for children, when they're feeling stressed or they're feeling dysregulated, having something crunchy can
Mm,
reset it can reset the brain. Having something cold having something fizzy. And so I always like to ask kids, like, what are your favorite snacks and drinks?
Mm.
Because I would strategically offer them. Like if I saw that they were starting to get dysregulated, like, hey, let's take a break and do you want to pick a snack? And I'd have something from what they already told me was their favorite. And it serves two functions. It's relationship building, it's play, it's taking a break, but then it's also like doing some self-soothing in the brain, which is very
Mhm.
helpful.
Yeah.
So all of that to say, these are kind of our primary pieces of our philosophy is
Mhm.
engaging kids, doing it in a way that is relationship building, um, encapsulating authenticity, and doing that in a way that builds like the bi-directional relationship
Mhm.
and trust. That's what really we think a Child's Voice project is like at the center of child-centered practice. And so I hope that you enjoyed learning a little bit more about how we handle it, what we recommend, the
Mhm.
types of skills that we teach. Um, and if you have questions, this is a great time. We've got a few minutes. So if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. You can also just unmute and say your question. But if you don't have anything to say, for your viewing pleasure on this screen, we are wondering if you are interested in receiving more training on some of these concepts that we present. Um, if you are, you can scan the QR code and fill out our interest form. All right, without further ado, we're going to conclude our session. You can, as always, find us on YouTube. We post our roundtables on YouTube. We are going to be taking a break with our roundtables for the month of April, but we'll be back and see you soon later this spring. Take care, everyone.
Thank you all. Thank you for joining us.